We are continuing learning the halachos of the Yamim Noraim, of the High Holy Days. And last time we started with the month of Elul and Alida into Rosh Hashanah. And today we'll start with the laws of Rosh Hashanah. Today I'll cover all the laws of Rosh Hashanah except the laws of Shofar. And then hopefully next time we can do the laws of Shofar. That'll be our plan for the day. So you should have the notes. I posted them earlier. And those should serve as a guide for what we're going to talk about. So for starters, we discussed a little bit on last time of Rosh Hashanah being the day of creation, or at least the day that human beings were created. So there's actually a machlokes, an argument between the Tanaim that the Gemara refers to between Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. I'm bringing this up because it's a famous machlokes that, anyone that talks about Rosh Hashanah often touches on this as to whether or not the world was created in the month of Nisan, which is the month Pesach falls out in. It's called which we count as the first month, or is it the month of Tishrei? And in general, although there's no such thing as paskening like one opinion when the opinion is not a halachically relevant statement, but we generally go according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that it was created in Tishrei, which is why we say in the Tefillah the language of Zeh Hayom Techilat Ma'asecha. You may recall those words from the Rosh Hashanah Machzor. Today is the day when you started your creations, meaning the creation of mankind on this earth. So that's how we generally go into that opinion. So Rosh Hashanah is the day of creation, and Rosh Hashanah is also the way this is halachically relevant in all shitaro, in all which a shtar is a document, a contract, a legal contract. Now, a lot of legal contracts have significant religious significance, such as a get, a bill of divorce, or a ketubah. I misspelled the word ketubot, which is a marriage contract or a business contract. And we always write the year. We write the date on which they're written. That's obviously an important part of the document. So we number the years based on it. Each year, as we pass Rosh Hashanah, it's a new year. Now, the custom that we have today of counting the years by creation, is a custom that started during the Gaonic period. That was after the Gemara was written. So during the 600s, 700s, 800s, somewhere around there is when we switched. Before then, it was counted based on the king of whatever empire the people were living in, the Greek Empire mostly, and the Roman Empire. But again, when the Jews wrote their documents, they would count according to the years of that king's reign, and they would notch up another year every Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah has a significant significance when it comes to those legal documents as well. Rosh Hashanah also has a significance because we count the years of Shemitah, which is coming up this year around. We count the cycle of Shemitah, and it always starts with Rosh Hashanah of Tishrei. So as soon as Rosh Hashanah comes out, it's either the first year of the Shemitah cycle, second year, so on, until you get to the seventh year, which is Shemitah itself. And the same if we were counting a Yovel, which is year 50. You do 7 cycles of 7 years, giving you 49 years. And then the 50th year is Yovel, the Jubilee, which also starts with Rosh Hashanah. So there's a lot of halachic significance to Rosh Hashanah, which you don't necessarily always think about as the high holy days are coming, but they are important laws that require mentioning if we're studying the laws of Rosh Hashanah. So now let's move on to Rosh Hashanah as a chag, Rosh Hashanah as a holiday. We know that the Tiku B'Chodesh shofar, blow the verse in Tehillim, blow the shofar on the first day of the month, which is referring to Rosh Hashanah. Ba'Kesa, on the day of Kesa, the day of hiddenness, and we're going to learn why Rosh Hashanah is a hidden day soon. We'll talk about that. But Liyom Chagenu, the day of our Chag. So just like on all the other Chagim, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, which are the three main Chagim, the three main holidays, there's several mitzvot that are related to the fact that it's a Chag. We have the same laws that apply to Rosh Hashanah. So, for example, the mitzvah of Simcha, the mitzvah of being happy and joyous, and which specifically means having a meal with meat and wine, and dressing, putting on special clothing, and buying special gifts for the family so that people are happy on Rosh Hashanah, applies to Rosh Hashanah as much as it applies to the other three main Chagim. So those rules would apply. However, there is a long-standing custom to mitigate the simcha, mitigate the happiness on Rosh Hashanah, a tiny drop less than on all of the other Chagim. And the reason for that is because there is also an aspect of awe and trepidation that we have as the Rosh Hashanah comes, because it is also a day of din, a day of law, a day of judgment. So even though we do all of the rules and keep all of the laws of simcha, of happiness in Rosh Hashanah, we mitigated a small amount. So some examples of how we do that is the custom of not to say Hallel. On every Chag, we say Hallel. On Rosh Hashanah, we don't say Hallel. The Gemara is famous for saying, God is sitting in judgment, and the books of life and death are sitting open in front of him, and we are sitting there singing praises. So it's kind of like a little bit off the mood of the holiday to be celebrating when God is sitting with the books of life and death open in front of him, so to speak. So we mitigate the simcha a little bit, and that's one concrete way, and that's done is by leaving out Hallel. We also we say we don't say the words Moadim L'Simcha, in Shemona Esrei, which we say on all the other holidays. There had been in the past a custom during the time of the Gaonim, a long time ago, there was a custom of some people to actually fast on Rosh Hashanah, but the general law has come down and has been accepted that that's unacceptable, because since Rosh Hashanah is a Chag, the requirement to eat on Rosh Hashanah is significant, and therefore it is considered nowadays inappropriate to fast, even if it once was a custom. That custom has been passed over, has been eradicated. Now, I would put out there a question, and I'll accept some answers so we can have some audience participation. And that is how is it that we're asked to celebrate on Rosh Hashanah? Celebrate a Chag and be happy and eat meals and drink and make kiddush on wine and have the whole family together when we're sitting in front of the judge. How many people go into a court, if they're being judged innocent or guilty on some very important subject that will affect the rest of their lives, and they're usually not partying. They're usually not having this big celebration. Maybe if they win and get acquitted, they'll make a party, but not at this point. So what do you think? I'll take a few suggestions as to why we would celebrate, how the Torah can require us to celebrate on a holiday like this. I'll open the floor for a few minutes.
I think it's a Hasidic answer that we know for sure that will come out not guilty. So, like that's why we celebrate, because we're sure that our Father will forgive us for everything.
Yeah. Well, that's one common approach, and that is that we're so confident, right? Yeah, and that is one way of looking at it. Any other ideas? And anybody hear anything else?
Yeah. So we're celebrating Malchus. We're celebrating Hashem's Malchus. That is the Melech HaMelechim, the King of all kings. And one of the things that I've always understood about Rosh Hashanah is that one of the themes is understanding God's ultimate kingship over everything. And that is part of what we're celebrating.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you for that as well. And that will lead directly into what I'm about to start talking about, the theme of Malchus. I'm going to focus on the halachic ramifications of that theme, but that's an important approach. That it's like a banquet in honor of the king. The king may judge us for good or bad, but we still make a banquet in the king's honor because we're celebrating the fact that he's our king. So that's another. Anyone have any other ideas? Go ahead.
It's still like, it's technically a Rosh Chodesh, right? It's the new month. It's still, if you're taking the opinion that it's the birthday of the world and the creation of man. So there are other things to be celebrating regardless of this extra piece of Yom Kippur.
Okay, that's good too. I like that also. That we're celebrating the other aspects of the day that are worthy of celebration. Any other ideas? Anyone else? So we got three good answers so far. Well, they're all good. If anyone has more later, if you think of it, let us know, or you can tell us next time as well. The idea that we just mentioned of malchut, of kingship, leads to some halachic ramifications, and I'm going to deal with those right now. And that is that one of the themes that people we talk a lot about, the idea of din, the idea that God is judging us on Rosh Hashanah, which is of course a very important idea. But the idea of din really derives from the true theme of the holiday. And if one really wants to know the theme of the holiday, according to Chazal, at least according to the rabbis, and that is, then we should look at how they wrote our tefillos. When everyone comes to shul, they open a machzor and they read it. So the Chazal, when they wrote those tefillos, they wanted to bang into our heads the basic themes of the holiday that they wanted us to learn. And if you read it carefully, you'll see repeatedly over and over and over again the idea of malchus, the idea of God's kingship, the fact that we're accepting him as a king. The whole idea of being judged doesn't have any place until we first accept God as a king. If he's not our king, then who's he judging us? So the whole thing really depends on God's ability to judge us, because he knows everything, and that's, we're going to get to in a moment, the idea of zichronot, the idea that God knows everything in our past, he knows our future, what our potentials are, he knows our present, he knows it all. So he's the ultimate judge. Any human judge can only look at the facts that he or she has in front of them, but God is a judge that also can judge by what's in front of him, but everything is in front of him. So he can truly judge us better than anyone else or any other physical being. And we see this reflected in the laws of Rosh Hashanah, because one of the only parts of Shemona Esrei that is absolutely obligatory that we add on Rosh Hashanah. And if you don't say it, you got to start over from the beginning, do the whole Shemona Esrei again, even if you did the whole long Musaf deal. If you forgot Hamelech HaKadosh, the words where we all the year round we say at the end of Ata Kadosh, where we specifically direct a blessing towards the greatness or the holiness of God, we end with the words Hakel HaKadosh, the holy God. And Kadosh generally is understood to mean Kadosh, meaning separate, special, something different than everything else, different than what we see every day in the physical world. But here we change it. It's not just Hakel HaKadosh, but he's Hamelach HaKadosh, the holy king. So he's different than every other source of authority, every other king on this world. God is a melech who is kadosh, a melech that is way different, a completely different character, a different type, as he's a holy king. So if you forget that word, you have to repeat Shemona Esrei, because that is the key word in the entire Shemona Esrei, special for Rosh Hashanah, HaMelech. So if you leave that out, you say it over again. We also say, and in the, I'm going to pull it up on my phone here so that I could read the language, and I'm just going to give a few examples of how how important this is based on the tefillos that Chazal have said, and this is important to keep in mind as we read the Machzor, the prayer book on Rosh Hashanah. Just give me 1 second. Wait a minute. I thought I had it here. Well, anyway, it's V'chenis Kadesh. I'm almost there. Scrolling down.
Uvchanit Kadesh in Ashkenaz is only in the repetition.
Oh, okay, all right, but it's still in the thing. But the
Yeah,
most of,
but you're looking for it probably in the silent, so it's only in the repetition.
okay, all right. So then let me flip a little farther on. Oh, V'chenis Kadesh Shimcha Hashem Elokeinu Yisrael. We ask God to be holy, and be sanctified over Israel. And it says, all the world should be afraid of you, and everyone should bow down to you. Everyone should gather together to do your will. The evil and the bad kings should leave. And the ultimate end of the whole tefillah is v'timlo chatu Hashem Elokeinu levacha. And you, only God, will be the king over the world. I'll call Maasecha, over all of your creations, Zion, and centered on Mount Zion, Mishkan Kodecha, and so on. So again, and we also end the blessing of the maiden blessing of Shemona Esrei that we had in Rosh Hashanah, the final words of Baruch Atah Hashem and Melech Al Kol Haaretz, where the king over the entire world, the Kadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaZikaron. So again, we see that the basic theme of the blessings that were written for specifically Rosh Hashanah Shemona Esrei emphasize over and over again this idea of making God the king. So this is an important idea, and halachically it's important. I'm not saying it shouldn't, not just philosophically, as if there's something bad about the philosophy. No, it's not at all. It's as important, but halachically, it's reflected in the fact that if we don't express this idea in every Shemona Esrei and Rosh Hashanah, then you're not Yotzei the tefillah, and you have to say it again. Now, so that leads us a little bit into the tefillos. I'm going to skip a little bit because in a minute I'm going to talk about the davening in more detail. I went a little out of order in my notes, so I'm up to 7D in my notes. But we'll deal with Malchiyot, Zichronot, and Shofar in a minute. So before we get back to the prayer, because I'm going to go into the laws of prayer a little bit more detail, I want to talk a little bit about another idea, by the way, that's important. I emphasized this a little last time, is that it's virtually 100% true. There might be tiny little exceptions on Rosh Hashanah davening, but it's virtually almost 100% true that we never pray on Rosh Hashanah for our own well-being. We don't beg God that, to forgive us for specific sins that we did, or grant us, or to give us specific things that we're asking for, but we concentrate and focus on these much more grander themes that are global in nature, that affect the entire Jewish people and the entire world, all of creation and everything. And these are the ideas that the davening focuses on, and that's what Rosh Hashanah is designed for, as opposed to a time of personal, reconciling ourselves personally with God. Now I'm going to go for a minute and talk a little bit about the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah. So just to review this, and if I say something that's obvious to many of you, please forgive me, but it's still a very important idea. I mentioned that Rosh Hashanah is called Bakesa. It's a hidden day. So there are certain things. What does that mean that it's a hidden day? So there's various interpretations, but one of the most basic understandings is that it refers to the fact that on the Rosh Chodesh, every Rosh Chodesh actually, the moon is hidden from view. So let's remember, the moon starts in the beginning of the month when it appears, and where the visible part of the moon looks like a very thin line on one side of the moon. Then as the month continues, it grows larger and larger until it's at a quarter way through the month, we could see half a moon, and in the middle of the month we see a full moon, and then it starts to shrink and shrink and shrink until it's a tiny little sliver on the other side. And then for approximately 24 hours, it disappears from our view. We can't see it. And that's and that day that it's completely disappeared is Rosh Chodesh, because at some time during that day, the sliver that shows up, which is the new moon, will be visible, will be seen. So that moment that the bit of new moon pops up, that's when Rosh Chodesh is declared. And traditionally, the way Rosh Chodesh is declared by Sanhedrin, by the great Sanhedrin sitting in the Beit HaMikdash. They would have two witnesses would visualize and see the first appearance of that new moon. Let's say it happened on a Tuesday morning or whatever. They would go to in front of the Sanhedrin. They would ask some questions, say, "Did you see the new moon?" They would verify that the testimony is valid, and then Sanhedrin would say, "We're declaring this the first day of the month," and then that day is Rosh Chodesh. Now, obviously, people knew they knew beforehand when it was going to happen, right? But until Sanhedrin declared it Rosh Chodesh, it wasn't technically Rosh Chodesh. And sometimes it would be near the end of the day, and people didn't know necessarily if it's going to be before Tuesday is over, or will it be when it's already Wednesday. So if you imagine, it's coming the day. Let's say it's Monday evening, right? And you don't know if sometime tomorrow the new moon is going to show up. So is tonight Rosh Hashanah, or is tonight the night before Rosh Hashanah? So in Yerushalayim, the custom was at the time of the Beit HaMikdash to begin the celebration of Rosh Hashanah on the day that people thought the new moon would happen, right? And then sometimes at some point during the next 24 hours, the new moon would be visualized, and they would come and Sanhedrin would declare this Rosh Hashanah. And then retroactively, everyone realized that we've been appropriately celebrating Rosh Hashanah today. The day would be over, Rosh Hashanah would be over, and everybody would go about, say Havdalah, and that would be the end. Now, but if let's say they spent an entire day celebrating Rosh Hashanah, and then the new moon doesn't show up until after it's nightfall on the next day, then it turns out that the first day they were keeping Rosh Hashanah just as an extra, and it's not really Rosh Hashanah until the next day. Now, unusual chagim, unusual holidays, which happen a week or actually 2 weeks later, Shavuot would be a week into the month, and Pesach and Sukkot, 2 weeks into the month. There's enough time to notify everyone when the actual Rosh Chodesh is, so that people can start the holiday together, and we don't have this problem. But in faraway places outside the land of Israel, the other chagim, they had this problem, right? The problem was that the Sanhedrin would declare it, but it might take 3 weeks for the word to get out to faraway places. So the custom became, because there's a doubt each day of the month, is it today or is it tomorrow, to keep 2 days of a chag outside the land of Israel. However, on Rosh Hashanah, this problem existed within Israel as well. The only people that would actually know when it is are the people that were within Yerushalayim, because outside Yerushalayim, once you get outside the tchum, outside the allowed distance that a person is allowed to walk, right, on the holiday, no one could possibly know. Maybe someone could scream it out loud or something, a few people, but basically even in the land of Israel. So just like
Shaul?
Yes, go ahead.
A question. How can you see the new moon?
Well, as soon as the little sliver is visible, that's the new moon.
Right? But that wouldn't happen on the day of the new moon. That would happen. So are you declaring the new month after the new month happened?
Sometimes that would happen, yeah. That the new month would be declared afterwards. But
you have to remember that there was no pollution then, so people saw the sky a lot clearer than we do today.
And you could see the moon even when it's light outside. I know it's even today sometimes, if it's often enough you could see it. So but it's tougher to see in the day, but it's possible. So what happens is, so now, just like we know now, as nowadays we don't anymore declare the new moon based on the Sanhedrin. What we do it now is we do it based on a calendar, because Hillel, the later Hillel, not the more famous Hillel, but the later Hillel, basically calculated out when the new moon is going to happen and gave us a calendar, and that's how we use it today. But the custom became for all the other chagim outside of Israel to keep 2 days because of this doubt as a custom. And it was also declared that in the land of Israel as well, Rosh Hashanah, you keep 2 days, because in Israel they also had kept 2 days in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So that in general, the same rule that applied to Chutz La'aretz for the other Chagim applies to Israel even applies even in Israel on Rosh Chodesh, but not exactly though, and I'll explain to you what I mean in a minute. So the origin of the idea of keeping 2 days of the other Chagim in Chutz La'aretz is that it's a doubt, right? Which is the real day? So we look at it as a suffix, which has a very important ramifications, and that is because, remember, and we've discussed this many times before, that the first day is the day we know is actually the Chag, right? So therefore it's a suffix in a D'oraita, right? In something which is Min Torah. The second day is a D'Rabbanan. We're keeping it because the Chachamim told us we should keep this custom, even though we have a calendar today. So whenever there's a situation of doubt on the first day, it's a D'oraita, and you go and you always make a more stringent decision, right? Where if there's a question, if there's a suffix on the second day, it's a D'Rabbanan, and you make a lenient decision. Now, some other things are because these 2 days are kept for separate reasons, that it's not one long Yom Tov. You're not allowed to prepare on day 1 for day 2, because technically day 2, in respect to day 1, day 2 is really not even a Chag. So therefore, you can't cook on the afternoon of day 1 in order to prepare for day 2. Hence, on the night of day 2, and we often have our meals very late if we want to cook something that takes time to cook. Now, there is a difference between Rosh Hashanah and the other Chagim in the 2 days, and here's the difference. You gotta hang with me here because it might get a little bit complicated. But let's say the witnesses would come on. Let's wind back to the time of the Sanhedrin and the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and the witnesses see the new moon, but it's after Mincha Gedola, so it's very late after Mincha Gedola, so it's late. It's like an hour or so before the day is a day is almost over. It's near the end of the day, so everyone has kept the whole Yom Tov, right? The whole first day, and if Bezdin, if the Sanhedrin hears this testimony, and it's like right on the edge of the day. So a lot of people, it'll be very, very confusing for people if they find out at the end, at this point of the day, exactly when Rosh Chodesh is. They may not have time to make the declaration. So the Chachamim, in order to avoid this huge amount of confusion, if the Eidim, if the witnesses came so late in the day, they wouldn't listen to the testimony. They would delay it. They just wouldn't listen until the evening, so that when they declared Rosh Chodesh, they would declare it the second day. So what happened, so in those cases, right, the day is actually the second day, and it was done deliberately, not because of a safek, not because of a doubt, but because the Chachamim decided to do it that way. So therefore, the day of Rosh Hashanah, by many, you'll find the term in halacha of it, Rosh Hashanah is to some degree not so much a sveika diyoma, where you have one day and the second day is a doubt, but what we call a yoma arichta. It's one long Yom Tov that takes 2 days, because there were times in history where it was deliberately made 2 days. As even before the custom of 2 days, there were days that the Chachamim deliberately had 2 days. So therefore, now this has some halachic ramifications even for nowadays. So one of the famous halachic ramifications that became one of the most beloved customs of Rosh Hashanah came out of this weird quirk in what the Chachamim used to do in order to avoid confusion. And what I'm referring to is the following debate. So the debate is as follows. Now, when you make Kiddush on the first day of Pesach, by the first Seder, you say a bracha of Shahriyanu because of the day, right? On the second day of Pesach, we make a Shahriyanu again, right? And why is that? Because since it's a safek, right? In other words, it might be today, it might be tomorrow. So when tomorrow comes, this might be the right day of Yom Tov, and therefore you make a Shahriyanu today. Well, that makes sense. But on Rosh Hashanah, if it's a Yom Arichta, if it's one long day, then there's another reason why we shouldn't make a Shahriyanu tonight, right? Especially since it might be a Sveika D'Rabbanan, right? But also because it's a Yom Arichta, it's not a Sveika D'Yoma, because we're doing this in commemoration of the fact that there actually were times when Rosh Hashanah was deliberately made a 2-day holiday. So therefore, some poskim say that you should not make a Shahriyanu on the second night, right? So and while others say no, but because the real main reason is because it's a suffix. It's true sometimes. So there's this debate. Now you can sit and debate this left and right, but if you have a debate, you really should not make a Shahriyanu the second night if you assume that it's a suffix D'Rabbanan, if it's a suffix with a rabbinic origin, because the second day is a rabbinic origin. In order to get ourselves out of this machloket, the custom became to give ourselves another excuse to make a Shahriyanu on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. And that other excuse takes the form of the most famous way. It takes the form of the new fruit that we eat on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. So that new fruit that everyone loves to buy, and I don't know, a lot of people I know, it's like one of the favorite standard conversations to have. What did you guys have for your Shahriyanu fruit last night? Well, it happens to be that it turned out to be a beautiful custom, because I always find a new fruit is something sweet, something nice, something special, something different to start off a new year, just to show how, this year's going to be different. It's going to be special. But that's not why we created this custom. This custom created in order to get us out of this halachic conundrum. So because of a technical halachic debate, we created what's, as a people, a really beautiful custom of having a new fruit. And some people, when the custom started, it could also have been done by wearing a new garment, buying a special new suit, and only wearing it and starting to wear it the second night. Also, another reason to make this blessing of Shahriyanu. And when you make the blessing, have in mind for both the day, in case you're supposed to, and for the new fruit. Okay, so now that we've established that, I wanted to say a couple laws about the Shahriyanu. Remember that when we say the Shahriyanu, we say it by Kiddush, because of the possibility that the second day, needs its own Shahriyanu bracha, right? But we also, when you say it at Kiddush time, you need to have in mind saying a Shahriyanu on the fruit. You may see some people mistakenly actually make the Shahriyanu when they eat the fruit. But that would be a mistake, because they've already said Shahriyanu in the Kiddush. And the whole point is to justify the Shahriyanu in the Kiddush. Now, but you don't make a bracha again. It would actually be a blessing in vain if you made the blessing again. Now, there are those that therefore have the custom to eat the Shahriyanu fruit immediately after Kiddush, before they wash on the bread. And this can create some confusion, and I'll explain why when we discuss the simanim, the special new things that we eat on the first night. So there would be a reason to say Shahriyanu, say Kiddush Shahriyanu, eat the fruit, and then wash, because you don't want to have a break between the Shahriyanu and the fruit that you eat. That's not everyone's custom. Other people have a custom to eat it after the bread, and they just assume that since it's all part of the meal, the Shahriyanu covers it. It's not really a hefsek. Remember, we studied in detail the concept of a hefsek. So there are different customs in this. Did someone want to say something?
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
In temple times, how did the fact that the new year started was communicated to everybody in Israel? In temple times.
So I'm not sure what you're asking. In the temple times, how did they communicate it? Or
yeah, you're saying that the Sanhedrin decided,
right? And they would send out messengers all across the land with the message. Is that what you're asking? You're asking something else?
Yes. There weren't signal fires or anything like that.
There was a time when they had signal fires, and then the Mishnah talks about when troublemakers started lighting fake fires and making messes with the signals. I mean, the various ways, the signal fires would go much quicker, but it didn't work out because people messed it up. But So, so, okay. All right. Any other questions? Sorry, before I go back to where I was.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So,
actually, yes, Shaul, I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
Yes.
So if we understand that on a Yom Tov or Shabbos, one can't walk more than the 2,000 amos outside the city limits,
Right.
Which was the distance that you referenced before.
Yes.
How would would they set up like messengers to go 2,000 amos, 2,000 amos? I'm just trying to.
No, they didn't do that on Rosh Hashanah to convey this message. So only people within Jerusalem itself actually knew, right? Which is why even within Israel itself, in all the other towns, people have 2 days. Which is why today they still keep 2 days, for that, even in Israel. So
because this is the only Yom Tov that is on Rosh Chodesh,
exactly,
right? All of the other ones are I'm saying this as a statement. It's more of a question, right? Okay. So just thinking through it, right? All of the other Yom Tovim are some number of days from the epoch of the Rosh Chodesh. On the 10th of the month, on the 5th of the month.
Right, yeah, and that's exactly the point. Rosh Hashanah is the only one. And then that goes back to what I started before. I said it's called Kesel Yom Chagenu, the day of the hidden day. It's hidden because it's the day that you can't see the moon, right? So it's hidden. And there's other things, then there's a lot of mystical ideas about why Rosh Hashanah is a hidden day. Maybe our din, or just the conclusion of our din is hidden from us, there's a lot of ideas. But one of the main ones said is that it's physically a day that's hidden because it's the only chag that falls out on the day that we can't see the moon. Now, okay, so I mentioned the issue of the bracha, the Shahriyanu, we say it by Kiddush night, and what the origin of the new fruit is. Okay, now I'm going to go back to the davening rules, and we're going to go through a whole bunch of laws of davening Rosh Hashanah. I'm taking, it's going to end up going more than my 45 minutes. I apologize, but I definitely want to finish this. And forgive me for going a little bit longer than usual. But so a couple of things about davening. We mentioned that in Musaf there's three ideas that the Chachamim established, we say, in the davening of Musaf. And those were Malchuyot, right, which is the main one. Malchuyot is the idea of kingship. And the reason why we say Malchuyot, kingships in plural, and God forbid we don't mean that there's more than one king of the world, but what we mean is Malchuyot is we're referring to the verses, the 10 verses which we quote from Tanakh that express the idea of God's kingship over the world. That's why it's called Malchuyot and not Melech, right? The same thing, Zichronot, we mentioned the rememberings or the God's capacity for knowing, for being all-knowing, knowing everything is Zichronot. And then we mentioned 10 verses that express that idea. The entire idea of God's being able to judge us in Rosh Hashanah is logically dependent on God's knowing of everything. If God doesn't know, then he can't judge. The reason why he is a fair and equitable and proper judge is because he knows everything, right? And then the third idea is shofrot, is the idea of shofar, which is the concept of waking us up to those two first ideas. So that's why it goes kind of in succession. But the main one of the three is Malchuyot, right? And that's why it's first, and that's why the blessing for the holiday itself is included in the Malchuyot bracha. And those other two. And they're all one unit. Even though they're three separate blessings, they're one unit. So say if a page of your machzor was torn out and you can't find someone else's machzor and you don't know one blessing, you're not supposed to say the other two either. It's not very relevant these days because pretty much we all have all the pages, but if that were in the days when people would say it would daven on their own or by heart, that could certainly be a feasible thing. The 10 verses, the Chazal said that we should mention 10 verses expressing each idea. There's various allusions of why 10 verses. The most common one that's stated is the Asara Ma'amarot Nivra Ha'olam. We already discussed the reason why this is the most common is because we already talked about the relationship between creation and Rosh Hashanah. So it makes sense that we should pick 10 places where God taught us this idea. corresponding to the 10 utterances of God that with which He created the world. So it kind of makes sense. Other things people compare to the Aseret HaDibrot, you'll see other ideas of 10 expressed, but I'm choosing to emphasize the first one because it really goes along with the theme of Rosh Hashanah. I already mentioned the usual holiday blessing is included in the first bracha. I was going to review the bracha of Malchut Tzifona the Shofrot. I'm going to skip that. You're welcome. Please look at the Machzor and look at the ideas, and you'll see how each blessing is really designed to teach us those ideas that I said. And they're important. These are required halachically for us to do on Musaf of Rosh Hashanah. Another thing we know is Rosh Hashanah, we don't say Vidoy. The general idea of why this is said is because Rosh Hashanah is a personal, at Rosh Hashanah, we don't emphasize our personal wrongdoings and our personal improvements in our lives, but rather we look at it as a community. And the entire prayer service of Rosh Hashanah is heavily focused on all of us doing this together, accepting Yasukulam Aguda Achas. We all do this as one together, one unity of the entire creation. Ideally, the entire creation should do this together. So we focus on the klal. I wrote a little thing in my notes about think vaccines. Because I'm going overboard, I'm going to just very briefly mention, and I'm sorry that I just can't hold myself back from saying this, is that it's so important when we look at things like this pandemic that we're living through and the idea of vaccination. And when you hear people saying it's a personal choice whether I should decide if I need this vaccine and it's right for me, well, obviously, some people may not be able to get it for some reason, but that's rare. But when we make a decision to do something like a vaccine, we need to look at it as a community, which is why it's so important. We're not doing it just for ourselves, and it's not a personal decision. It's a choice we make as a community so that all of us protect each other. And if we look at it that way, we can understand better the idea of Rosh Hashanah. I think that's a very concrete way for us to think of it. If our entire society were to take it and themselves in order to protect all of us, we would have a different outcome, and we wouldn't be having some of the suffering we're seeing today. But even though we say even on Yom Kippur we say Arvidu, we say Ashamnu, we sin, Bagadnu, but there's still a much more individual component to what we do on Yom Kippur, and we'll get there. But in Rosh Hashanah, it's all about the klal. There is some controversy over Avinu Malkeinu on Rosh Hashanah. Some say there are some nuschaot that I think many Sephardic machzorim don't say Chatanu Lifanacha, which is one of the Avinu Malkeinus, because it's too similar to the Vidoy. But some do. Most Ashkenazic places do, but it's a part of that same debate. We already talked about not saying Hallel. I'll skip that. For the Torah, we call up 5 aliyot because, like we said, Rosh Hashanah is a chag, just like Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And just like we know that, on a regular weekday, it's 3, on Rosh Chodesh, it's 4, on a chag, it's 5. So Rosh Hashanah is a chag, it gets 5, Yom Kippur is 6, Shabbat is 7, but that's how it's 5. Now, no discussion is on Rosh Hashanah customs and laws is good without discussing the simanim, the signs, things that we do on the first night. The most famous one, of course, is the apple and honey. I'm not going to go into each one in detail. It'll just take us a long time. But the general idea is that we paskin in the Gemara, simna miltahi, that making a sign, doing things that symbolize something is miltahi. It's a something. It means something. Now, whether that actually means that doing this will somehow make my year better or make my year sweeter, or does it mean that it puts us in the right frame of mind? It puts us in that mindset that we look positively, we have optimism about the future and work towards it. Whether that's what Simna, it depends on how rationalistic or mystical your own personal outlook on life is. But we can certainly see and understand why it's important to start off our year in a good way with sweet things. We also see certain customs that we don't have, like some Ashkenazi communities have the custom not to eat walnuts because the word egos has the same numerical value as the word chet, the word sin. There's an Ashkenazi custom not to eat sharp foods, like don't put crane on your gefilte fish, because again, not only do we want to start off the year sweetly, we don't want to start off the year with sharp, punishing flavors. Halachically, there are some issues involved in the simanim, and one touches on the idea that I said before. So remember, when we talked about the new fruit, there are some that have the custom to eat the new fruit immediately after Kiddush, after the Shahriyanu, before the Challah, because that's what the Shahriyanu was made on. With the simanim, it's generally considered incorrect to do it that way. Okay, so you should eat the challah first. And if you remember when we talked about the laws of brachot, when you have different foods in front of you, we said you pick the most significant, the most special food. Bread is the top category of food. So you should always, if you have bread in front of you and other foods, you're supposed to make the blessing on the bread first. It's not because eating the bread will make you not have to make a bracha on the fruit. And I'll explain why in a minute, because that's what many of us might think. The reason why you make the blessing on the bread first is because bread is the most chashuv, it's the most special, it's the most significant. So on the first night, you're supposed to make hamotzi first, not dip the apple in the honey first. As much as the kids are excited about the apple and the honey and challah they have every week, you have to wait till after the challah and then dip the apple in the honey. And then when you have the challah, you actually do make a borei priya eitz on the apple. And the reason why you make the borei priya eitz, even though you just made the blessing on bread, and now that we're all experts in the laws of brachot, you'll remember that we explained that food that is part of the meal, that is being brought to the meal because it's part of the meal, right? It's bam machmat hasuda, it's coming as part of the meal. We said that's the kind of food that bread covers, right? But if you bring something that's like a dessert, something special afterwards, like we said, if you bring out fruit at the end of the meal, we said that the law is you make a borei priya eitz. Now over here, this isn't dessert, but you're bringing the apple not because it's part of the meal, but because of its own special reason. You're bringing in this apple because of the special siman that we're doing for Rosh Hashanah. It's not coming for the meal, it's coming for Rosh Hashanah for its special reason, and therefore the bread does not cover the apple, so you do make a borei priya eitz. So the proper way to do it then on the first night is challah first because it's chashuv, then the apple and the honey, you make a borei priya eitz. If one of your simanim, and this is something else, another law that we covered before, remember we said if you have different fruits in front of you and one of them is a fruit that's one of the 7 fruits with which the land of Israel was blessed. So many people have tamarim, dates, right, as one of the simanim. So if you have dates, then you're actually supposed to make the blessing of a eitz on the date and not on the apple, despite the fact that all the kids are excited to have their apple and the honey. So if you wanted to do it exactly correct, you should, if you have dates, I mean, there's a million customs out there, but if you have dates in front of you or pomegranates, which is another one of the 7 species, you should make the blessing on the date, then the pomegranate, then and the reason why, because that's the order they are in the verse, and then you eat the apple, so you'd make ha'etz. Now, what about ha'adamas? There are many of the simanim that we eat. The most famous Ashkenazi one is tzimitz, is sweet carrots, is a famous siman. Many say that since tzimitz is often served as part of the meal, right? Even though right now you might be eating it in the beginning, but it's a very common side dish. So therefore they say, don't make the hadama because it's kind of really part of the meal anyway. But if you were to serve some kind of a melon, I don't know, if you have as a siman a vegetable that's also a siman, then you would make hadama on it. But if it's cooked and it's made into a salad that you could conceivably have served anyway as part of the meal, then you shouldn't make the hadama. Am I making sense? Is any questions on all this? We got that? I'm going to assume that it's pretty straightforward. So again, the first night, it's Kiddush, Shahriyanu, Hamotzi, Borei Priya eitz, on the Shivas Aminim first, then the apples, then generally not a Ha'adama if your Simanim are Ha'adama, and then you go on with your meal. On the second night, it's, go ahead, sorry.
And if there are Simanim that aren't eaten, right? So let's just say that you've got a fish head or a lamb's head, right? That you might not eat, but you have it as a simon. You wouldn't say a bracha because you're not eating it, right?
Right. You would not say a bracha. You could say a Yehi Ratzon because that's just a prayer. You know, a Yehi Ratzon is not directly tied to eating it, you know. So you can say the Yehi Ratzon. Let's say you're serving timus and you happen to be allergic to carrots and you want to say the Yehi Ratzon. There's no reason not to. It's just a tefillah, a prayer you can say at any time. So that's so that's the first night. The second night, again, the order is Kiddush, Shahriyanu, but have in mind the fruit. And when a woman lights candles on Rosh Hashanah that second night, she should have in mind when she says Shahriyanu also on the fruits that she's going to eat. Then you make a hamotzi, and then if that's your custom, and that is generally the custom, and then you again make ha'etz, but no Shahriyanu after the bread on the new fruit. If it happens to be your custom to eat the fruit before the challah on the second night, then that's fine. But I haven't seen that often, but there is custom out there like that. There's a couple other things, the special greetings for Rosh Hashanah night that are brought in the Sifrei Halacha, you know, Lashana Tova Tikasev B'Sichasev. Some have the custom not to say V'Techatein, which is and be sealed, because the sealing doesn't happen until Yom Kippur. So they just say Lashana Tova Techatev, but that's those are customs. There's a custom of not sleeping on Rosh Hashanah. This has its origins mostly in mystical texts. The idea is that if you sleep too much, then God's going to have you have a very Parshlufa Niyar, a year full of, you want a year that's active, full of life, not a year that's full of sleep. No discussion. I'm trying to cover every Rosh Hashanah halacha except for the big one, which is shofar, and we'll do shofar next time. But so I have to cover tashlich, and here I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent, which you'll see in a minute. But the tashlich custom seems to go back probably to it's an early Ashkenazic German origin custom, probably sometime around the times of the Hasidei Ashkenaz, who were about the 12th and 13th century Ashkenazi Jews is where it first popped up, and it got a boost from the Arizal and the Mikabalim in Sfat, who liked this custom, and they boosted it into the Sephardic world as well. But it didn't quite penetrate the Sephardic world as much as it penetrated the Ashkenazic world. So among the Sephardic communities, you may find some do it, some don't. But among Ashkenazic communities, it's very widespread. The Maharil, who was one of the lived at near the end of that time of the early Ashkenazic period, explained that the origin of it was you know how on the second day of Rosh Hashanah we read the Parsha of the Akedah in order to remind us of the special zuchus that our forefathers have of Avraham Avinu, of the sacrifice he was willing to give up for God. And on his way, there's a medrash, there's a story about how the Satan tried to stop him from going by putting a river in his way, and he walked through that river. So going to the shore of a river reminds us of the sacrifice that Avraham Avinu made of the Akedah. So that's one of the origins. You'll find a lot of other explanations. Water is the symbol of purity, of Tahara. Water is Mayim Chaim, it gives us life. And also the verse in Micha itself is, but that God will throw and God, we ask God to throw into the depths of the sea all of our sins, which is another idea about tashlich. I wanted to read to you my own take. It's not obviously not my own. There are other people that say something similar on tashlich. Just give me 1 second. I have to pull it up. If you look at there's a beautiful one of the most beautiful nevuot prophecies are about the time of redemption, and I think it's very relevant for the custom of tashlich. And I think it's one of the reasons why tashlich became such a popular custom. And it's a prophecy that's repeated by both Yechezkel and Zechariah. They both have it's a little slightly different, but they're really beautiful, and I think they can help us out this Rosh Hashanah when we do tashlich, make it a little bit more meaningful. And And if Yechezkel says it in a really beautiful way. So we're talking in Yechezkel, Parak Mem Zayin 47, we could start in verse 3. And Yechezkel he has a grand vision of what the third temple is going to look like, what the days of the future are going to look like. And Yechezkel really describes to us what influence the third temple, when it's built one day, is going to have on the rest of the world. That it's not just going to be a temple that in Jerusalem where we go to the temple and we focus on it and we direct our attentions to God, but it's also going to be a place from which life comes and gives life to everything around the entire world. So it's not just a place that we go to, but it's a place where everything and a beautiful influence comes from. The symbol of that is water flowing from the temple. So Yechezkel says, he's discussing the malach, the angel who was showing him around the third temple, and he says, he walked me through a river that was flowing from the walls. He just described this small stream that was flowing out from the Beit HaMikdash down the mountain towards the rest of the world. And the river was at the depth of his ankles. And he kept walking, and then you see in the next verse 4, the water got deeper and deeper up to his waist, until it got deeper and deeper, until he couldn't go in the river other than by swimming, until he brought me to the shores of the river when it got so deep and so full of water. And he showed me, he said, look at this water. This is verse 8. Vayomer Elai, the angel told me, Hamayim O'ela, these waters, Yotzim El HaGalila HaKadmona, are flowing all the way out to the way far reaches of the east. V'yardu al Arav, and they're going way down towards the south, and they're going way down towards the west. And all of these waters are pure and fresh. Kol nefesh chaya, all living creatures, asher yishrotz, every living animal in this world is going to be influenced. All of the fish, there's going to be so many fish that are going to be influenced and get so much life-sustaining force from this river coming from the temple. So this vision and the idea, and you could read how he goes on and talks about how all of the trees are going to bear fruit and everything from this beautiful temple and the rivers that flow from it in the future times. And just again, if we look at Zechariah, the prophet Zechariah, chapter 14, I'm just going to read a couple verses, and then you'll understand why I think, for some reason which I don't understand, this is rarely described as the reason for the custom of Tashlach on Rosh Hashanah, but I personally think that this is the main reason. Zechariah in chapter 14, verses 8 and 9 says as follows: in the day in the future, there will be life-giving waters flowing from Jerusalem. Half of them will flow towards the east, and half of them will flow towards the west, and they will constantly flow through all the seasons of the year. And then he concludes, and with this life-giving water flowing from Jerusalem will be a pasuk, a verse that we're all very, very familiar with. V'haya Adonai lemelech, God will be the king, I'll call haaretz, over the entire earth. Bayomahu, on that day, Yeh Adonai echad u'shmo echad. That verse we're all very, very familiar with. But that encapsulates the entire theme of Rosh Hashanah, is when the life-giving force to all creatures of the world, the trees, the fish, the birds, the flowers, everything, every human being on earth will get this Mayim Chaim coming, the source of life coming from Jerusalem. That is the day God will be king, and that's the ultimate idea of Rosh Hashanah. I think that Tashlif is a beautiful custom, and I really, really believe, and I don't really know why I don't see this quoted more often as the true idea behind the custom of Tashlach on Rosh Hashanah, because it's that idea of these flowing waters of life that really is going to make God king over the entire world, and we hope to see that one day. You'll have to read my notes. I wrote a little bit about the laws on Shabbos. If Shabbos falls out on Rosh Hashanah, I'll skip that now. You can go through them. But since this year it doesn't fall out on Shabbos, it's not as relevant. I'll open the floor to comments, and then we could get ready for next week when we're going to talk about the laws of the shofar. Any comment?
I really like that explanation of Tashlich, better than anyone I've ever heard.
Thank you. I appreciate it. To me,
thank you so much.
The whole idea of tossing my sins into a river never really resonated.
Yeah, it didn't resonate with me either, and that's why when I realized this was it, I truly believe sometimes you say something, it sounds good. Sometimes you say something and it actually sounds like the truth. Whether it is the truth, I don't know, but it certainly sounds like it.
I just felt like I had so much more work to do than just tossing something into a river. It was like an easy way out or something.
It adds so much more weight and meaning, or can add so much more weight or meaning to the minhag.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Sure.
Shaul, where did the waters that you just spoke about and referred to in Zechariah, where did they originate from?
Well, Zechariah was paraphrasing Zechariah was one of the last prophets. So a lot of Zechariah's prophecies are shortened versions of the longer prophecies from the bigger prophets, Yeshayahu, Isaiah, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, and Yechezkel. So Zechariah in these two verses is encapsulating the prophecy that Yechezkel had made in a much more longer version. So Yechezkel had the long version and Zechariah was just repeating it. But Zechariah was the one who said that pasuk of Vaya Hashem lemelech hakol haaretz, which we say it many times in davening, and we actually end our davening every day. Aleinu, we end with that verse from Zechariah, which is one of the most famous verses in the entire Tanakh. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining me. Looking for. I have to check. I think I go next week. It might be the Maharat, but I'm pretty sure it's me next. So either me next week doing Tkiyat Shofar or the Maharat, and then either way, the next week that I give it, it's going to be on the laws of Shofar.
Yeah.
And then we can move on to
Shaul,
yes.
how will